particular maternal ancestor loaded up all the women and children onto the boat, the Mazeppa. They had to shoot the sandbar because the Boers were bringing up their long tom gun. So she put up mattresses so that they would survive. They sailed all the way to Delagoa Bay. There wasn't any help there. By the time they'd gotten back, one of their sons had helped the king escape, and the siege of Port Natal was over. But it's
Welcome to Crossing the Line, a weekly podcast show in which we interview people, interesting people, about their life stories and about the issues troubling our country, our continent, and the world. My name is Ryland Fisher, and I'm your host. I want to thank Mobilearn for all the technical support, which makes this show possible. Our guest today is Dr. Barbara van Heerden, who has a PhD in commerce from Nelson Mandela University, and she's a very experienced business development expert, an entrepreneur, etc., etc. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you, Ryland.
We met at the Cape Times Union. I didn't know that you had also been at the Cape Times. And we talked about business in Africa, and I was very interested in what you had to share with me, and I thought I must get you on the show. But I want to talk about that, obviously. But maybe let's start off a little bit. Let's go back even way before then. Kind of, where did you grow up? Where did you school? Because all of these things obviously impacted on the person you became in later life.
No, for sure, it has a huge impact, and it's that perennial argument, nurture versus nature. And so I was born in Pietermaritzburg. I've met more people from Pietermaritzburg and Cape Town than I ever knew in Pietermaritzburg, and a lot of them were at the Cape Times. I went to school in Durban. My mother's family is a very one of the original white settlers that came to Durban. But he was an interesting white settler in that he had married the granddaughter of a slave here in the Cape called Francina van der Kaap. And she was a Khoi slave. And I don't know yet how many generations back the slave link was. But she was the property of a Peter Hacker, who was from the Netherlands. And so it was a strange link. They got married in Cape Town, and they moved to Durban. And although he was a solicitor, the entrepreneurial opportunities that he opened for himself was salt. So he bought from the king, the Zulu king at the time, he bought that area all around what is now Durban Bay and Salisbury Island. He owned Salisbury Island, and he gathered the salt. And he had a Zulu name, which was the old man of the salt mines. And he was very instrumental, him and his wife were very instrumental in welcoming English settlers which was then Port Natal. And now I understand why that particular maternal ancestor was so interested in the welfare of women and children because of her own slave ancestry. So that explained a lot of the whole emphasis within my family of always putting back and being community-minded. And so obviously Durban built up around that. He also got locked up by the Boers. He was in the stocks. He was jailed with George Cato. He was, part of the rescue by Dick King. That particular maternal ancestor loaded up all the women and children onto the boat, the Mazeppa. They had to shoot the sandbar because the Boers were bringing up their long tom gun. And so she put up mattresses so that they would survive. They sailed all the way to Delagoa Bay. There wasn't any help there. By the time they'd come back, one of their sons had helped the king escape, and the siege of Port Natal was over. But that's a long story for a short question.
No, but it's wonderful. I think it's amazing how all these things impact on all of us, and also, I mean, when you think about how interconnected we are, and how we probably have more in common than we realize.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We have a very entangled cultural fit in South Africa. And you can't just look at names, you can't look at cultures, because you've got hundreds of years of history where the connections all are.
So when we met last week, and I was trying to figure out a way in which to describe you, you said that you have an innate hunger for good business.
Yes.
Where does it come from? And when did you kind of realize that this is what you want to do?
Well, probably when I was about 8 years old, and I figured out my pocket money wasn't enough. And a friend down the road had a whole lot of baby mice, and these mice kept on having babies. And so my first entrepreneurial venture was selling the baby mice to the boarders at the school that I went to. And the first transaction was, it was 2.5 cents, because we had already moved into the decimal system. 2.5 cents each. So the first transaction went ahead, and I came back and I bought the next batch. And obviously I bought sweets with the rest. And then the second batch, that is when I learned about business risk. I had a Dachshund, a dog, as my pet. And I hadn't put the baby mouse high enough from his interest in what on earth was in the box. And so, needless to say, my produce was not alive anymore.
Sure.
And lesson number 1, retained earnings. If you're going to be a successful business person, you need to retain your earnings to counteract risk like that. So it's sort of strange things like that children do. I can remember my sister saying, if we ground down the shale in the garden, we could sell it as face powder. And we would sit for hours in the street waiting for people to come and buy the face powder. It's that sort of stuff that children get up to. My mother was an inventor. She invented something called the heel protector. Stilettos were very much in fashion in the early 60s. And of course in Howick there was the rubber factory. So she had a mold done, and you got this rubber sleeve that you put on the heel of your shoe, clipped it on, so that when you drove you didn't ruin the stiletto heel. And it was called the heel protector. So that was my mother's entrepreneurial bent. And of course, my father was managing director of an international company, and we moved around the world. And that's when my love of factories initiated. I must have gone into every single factory that this particular global corporation had in every single country when we were on holiday or given long leave, because my father was from the UK. My mother obviously was local.
You left home, I think, at 17 or something?
That's right. I got married at 18. Yes, I married my farmer.
Yeah. And so maybe tell us a little bit about that story, because that's also when you were farming, and then you kind of realized
That's right.
that there's more value for you to be made out of processing
That's right.
than
Yes.
actually selling the goods. So maybe tell us a little bit about the
Okay,
story.
so at 18, I fell my first year out of school. I mean, in the day that I went to school, you were 16 and 17 in matric.
Mm,
And in the first year I was out of school, I fell madly in love with a farmer. And the world was different then,
mm.
you know, when you
And he
fell.
was considerably older than you.
Yeah, it was seven
Yeah,
years, which when you're 18 and he's 25, yes, it is considerable.
yeah.
And so my parents were actually very twitchy about all of that. Anyway, there was no living together or anything like that in those days. So off to church we went and we got married. And he was a brilliant farmer and he always wanted to actually farm on his own. So we started farming on our own. And he was a poultry farmer. He'd had a job with hatchery manager of Rainbow Chickens, and so we went into the live trade, the live market. And because our farm was between Pietermaritzburg and Durban, there was a huge Hindu market for crowing cockerels, and the crowing cockerels had to be a certain color. And so I learned about target markets at that stage, and that was wonderful. Every week, the trucks would arrive, and we would sell the crowing cockerels.
Mm,
And one week, the trucks didn't arrive. Now, this was pre cell phones. And one of the things we didn't realize was that when your layers, your hens, when they stop laying eggs, then the word goes out. And that's when your target market suddenly doesn't have crowing cockerels anymore. It's quite happy to put that to the side and go for nice, big, fat, well structured hens that had finished laying eggs. And of course, they go at a very reduced sum because the farmer has already made money from the eggs.
mm,
And the other point about poultry, they give you a good return on the food that they eat to their weight gain only until a certain age. Then after that, they eat more and they don't put on any weight. And when you're selling live or even when you're selling dressed, it's all by weight.
mm,
So the solution then was to go for a dressed bird rather than a live bird.
mm,
And that in itself was a whole learning curve because the average poultry farm, their abattoirs closed down on a regular basis. And it was a highly regulated industry. So I went to go and see the person in charge of it. And first of all, you had to buy the really big book of regulations, which cost the same as what a second-hand bucket cost. But without that, you were never going to get past. And then I found out what all the regulations were and what it was he had failed all the other poultry abattoirs on. So that made my job a lot easier. And luckily for us, we passed immediately, got grade A chickens. I only ever worked with Zulu women. I do speak Zulu. And then, of course, now it's a different market. And that was when you first start off running through all your parents' contact lists. And because it was the days before supermarkets, you had bigger grocery stores, but they weren't self-service. They were still, you were served. And then of course Pick and Pay came in with that slightly different market and a way of doing things, and then you could scale up. So once that whole retail sector started changing, there was a much bigger market to cope with dressed poultry than your butchers and restaurants and big sporting clubs that would cater for their clients.
So you got married early. When did you start studying?
Oh, I did it all back to front. I did everything back to front. I had lots of children as well. And it was
What's lots?
Well, I had 7 children, but I've got 4 surviving children.
Sure.
And when they started going to school, I had the classic empty nest syndrome. And yes, and then I built quite a few factories, and I started working with Zulu women in what used to be the homelands, because this is pre-democracy,
Mm,
and built industrial hubs to try and generate income, because the men had gone off to Gauteng and the women were left in the homelands, and the homelands were never very good areas in which you could really have your goats and plant the vegetables to sustain your family. So by starting an industrial hub, and getting that whole supply chain going,
mm,
then I was able to bring about a lot of socioeconomic development.
mm,
And also I go through the doors that open. And it so happened that in this particular community, we were up in the Camberg, in the area around Moy River, a man who was an organizational behaviorist. He bought one of the big farms, which he turned into a training and conference center, and he specialized in organizational behavior. And he said to me, with your all your factories and your industrial hub, wouldn't you like to train to be an organizational behaviorist? So that was the start of my learning. And then, as the children grew up and I moved away from the farm down to the Cape, I started, because of my various factories, too many to mention now, but they covered most industrial sectors. I then started consulting, and and then my own children started going to university. And one of my children, who was very keen on being a sports psychologist, high performance coach, he said, Edinburgh Napier are here and they've got an incredible MBA program. Why don't you go and see them? And yes, on the consulting work that I'd been doing, I had done a lot of work for the new government on recognition of prior learning.
mm,
And so I knew that there were opportunities out there. And I had, many years before that, done a human resource management diploma through Damlin, because I was wanting to work with unions. Up until then, I had worked a lot with senior executives.
mm,
And to get down to the union level, I felt I needed more industrial relations. And so I knew about recognition of prior learning and setting up the sectional educational training authorities as well. And I went along and met the professors from Edinburgh Napier University and MBA, and they had something called a GMAT test. And I sat the GMAT test. That's how I started my MBA.
And so, how old were you at that point?
I would have been mid-40s. Yeah, mid-40s.
And
And
when did you do your PhD?
oh, my PhD, I started when I was 60.
Sure.
Yeah. And I loved it. I mean,
Yeah.
the MBA was fantastic. And one of the nice things about doing a UK-based MBA program, but in Africa, was that my cohort was everybody else from Africa, and we would get together in Johannesburg for our modules. So
Mm,
the networking for me, because obviously I consult hugely into Africa, was that people in that cohort were the new ministers in the evolving countries. And so you had worked and studied with them, so your links were actually very good.
mm. I want to get to talk about business in Africa, but first I need to just, for my own curiosity's sake, your association with the Cape Times. Let's talk a bit about that.
Oh,
When were you at
well,
the Cape Times? What did you
yes.
do?
Okay,
Etc.
so it all happened through a door that opened. I had written a couple of books and had won some short story competitions. And my love of business and with the consulting that I was doing, I really thought I would love to do something more positive about my writing. Instead of doing fiction, perhaps be an investigative business reporter. And so I thought, now, how am I going to go about that? And my sister's close friend, Diane Cassé, she worked at the Cape Times, and she was going away, and she was very involved in the events of the Cape Times. She wrote columns as well. And she did a lot of the marketing and the promotion and the branding and the positioning of the Cape Times. And she did a whole lot of other tasks as well. And she was going away, and she asked whether I'd like to fill in the work that still needed to go on a day-to-day basis. And that would be like your weekend events or your weekly events, and tele-letters, of course, because tele-letters gave a lot of insight into the readership of the Cape Times, what got the readers going, what was of interest, and also some of the topics led to greater discussion. So it was a little toe over the threshold. And then as I became more and more proficient and other opportunities opened up in the Cape Times, and people left, and it was before the knock and drop, so you would have the Atlantic Review and the Southern Suburbs Review. And then I started doing those ones. And the highlight of my very small career into journalism was going off on a Monday morning to the editor's office to say what you were going to run with on your little Southern Suburbs Review or your Atlantic Review.
Yeah. And you lived what?
I left because I realized that the very good business journalist that they had doing that, she was good and she was never going to go anywhere. I mean, and my business was really growing. My consulting business was
Was it
going.
Maggie?
Yes, it was, and she
Maggie
subsequently
Robert,
left anyway. But I mean, but you know, your paths just. But I loved being at the Cape Times. I was only there for 2 hours every day, but those 2 hours, they were so stimulating.
Yeah. Anyway, let's get to the topic that I really want to talk about. So in your PhD, you wrote about a sustainable business model for Africa, based on an 8-point program to implementing responsible business, public-private partnerships, and sustainable business performance, basically. So what is unique about your approach?
Oh, yes. Well, right. So when you talk about sustainability, to most people, it becomes people, planet, and prosperity. And so those are your 3 pillars of sustainability. So in a business, they would call that triple bottom line. And you can have performance outcomes that you can measure. So what makes Africa so different is that we have economic performance, which is generic. So it'll be about your retained earnings. It will be about market share. So that is generic. And then on the people side, in Africa, we have quality management business performance. And that has a particular focus on safety and health in the workplace, your basic conditions of employment, your organized labor, your working conditions, compliance with that, and how your quality management of your products or your services. Because in Africa, they see quality management business performance key to being sustainable. So that is unique. Other continents haven't got it. Then on the environmental side, we have what's called social responsibility business management performance. And that is where your staff, your community, your customer, and your environment are all part and parcel of these performance outcomes. So that in itself is very unique, and that's when the transdisciplinarity aspect starts coming in, which is the entanglement of many different sciences. And my model proved that the successful businesses in Africa implement 8 strategies, 6 of which interact with each other and deliver on these performance outcomes, and 2 are implemented, governance is implemented, and innovative technology is implemented, but it doesn't affect any of the performance areas. What it does do, it provides an enabling environment. And the other 6 strategies interact with each other. And so this is what makes Africa so unique, is that we have 8 strategies that drive and provide the environment for the 3 performance outcomes. And another very unique one is called community support strategy, which sits in your social responsibility business management performance outcomes, where your customers and your supply chain and your staffing are all involved in doing community outreach programs that are environmentally driven or socioeconomically driven, because it's all interacted. And the African businesses see the community support strategy as to that what keeps you sustainable.
So your PhD was based on speaking to
Uh,
a couple of
Yeah,
hundreds.
382 companies. So
Yeah.
the companies were divided into 3 different types. You've got cultural companies, and a cultural company would have been the media, banking, hospitality, so anything that is culturally driven. Then you've got biological companies, so there'll be your pharmaceuticals and your food and everything like that. And then you have your geological companies. So besides mining, you've got your logistics and your warehousing and all of that. So those are your 3 groupings. And so companies, and you've got your different layers. You've got your raw layer, your extraction, and then your next layer will be processing. Your next layer is the services that go along that. And then your 4th one, of course, is all your IT. And for any country, business, community to be sustainable, you need to have all 4 tiers operating. And the other very important aspect of long-term sustainability is the encouragement of spend at least 7 times within communities, within regions, within countries before it starts moving out.
You're talking about something that is unique to Africa, and that the rest of the world could learn from.
Absolutely.
Why isn't the rest of the world learning from it?
Oh, well, I've been a bit slow in writing my business journals. I do want to curriculate the findings, because I feel that if one can curriculate the findings and call it Earth Stewardship Business Science, and then have it part of the business management curriculum throughout the world, the young people coming into business, it will be part of their thinking, because transdisciplinarity is the synthesis of new knowledge to create a new way of thinking. And that would be a way of addressing the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is old indexes for capitalism. And if we bring along my business model, which is a prosperity business model, then we can start moving through business and through the youth learning about Earth Stewardship business science. We can start bringing in the new way of measuring prosperity capitalism, which is more encompassing than just economics. It's about the well-being of your social lives. It's the well-being of your planet. It's everything that can cope with finding solutions to complex, challenging problems.
So, you know what you're talking about, for me, sounds very much like what some people might call transformation. Because my understanding of transformation is not just about the economy, it's about the people, it's about the environment, it's about kind of looking differently at everything and incorporating all of it in the way we can do better business. I don't know if you think my assessment is correct. And maybe let's answer that first and then.
No, transformation is a lovely word. And how do you get businesses to transform? Because research has shown out of every 3 businesses, only 1 will change. And most change happens after a crisis.
And so if we're sitting with this amazing business model in Africa, why is this perception, negative perception of African business? Why is there this negative perception of the continent? And what can be done to change it?
Those words are so very, very true. And we need to believe in ourselves for a start. And this is why I think the curriculation process is so important, because then it's open to a lot of youth to start thinking, to start being critical thinkers. And also, I think if you look at so many of South Africa's programs that we've done in the New Democracy, we've talked about integrated development plan. We talk about urban integrated planning. We talk about our national, and we talk about the European Union's 2063 plan. And last year I was involved in the voluntary national review of businesses in South Africa on the Sustainable Development Goals for the reports that our president will present back to the United Nations. All our programs over the years in our own democracy process has been about collaboration. It's about knowing that by sharing our experiences and building best practices, we can solve very complex challenges. But one of the things we really do need to do is we need to have this very positive view of ourselves, which the rest of Africa has a far more positive view of themselves than the average South African has, where we often see ourselves as not being empowered. But in actual fact, that's a perception. So we need to believe and understand how we do come together and we make changes. And what was interesting coming out of that United Nations voluntary national review process was that businesses see the priority sustainable development goal as good business and economic growth, which is number 8. They saw number 13 as, and that is climate change, because they feel that carbon border taxes and the expenses incurred by non-compliance, carbon non-compliance, because we trade a lot with Europe, is going to have huge negative impacts. And then the third one, which brings me full circle to what I briefly discussed, is partnerships, which is Sustainable Development Goal number 17. We do need to partner. We do need to share our experiences. We do need to engender that outlook.
So of the 300 and was it 380?
81, yeah.
81 businesses you spoke with, how many of them are local? Are there any foreign businesses? And the reason I'm asking is because I know for the fact that there are many foreign businesses who trade in Africa without plowing anything back into the continent. So their priorities are completely different.
But they're not sustainable.
Yeah.
You see, they won't be sustainable.
Mm.
And because
So,
the most...
so where did you speak to any foreign
Yes,
businesses?
of course.
Okay.
I mean, it was the wide spectrum. There were multinationals.
Okay.
There were parastatals. There were NGOs, not-for-profits. There's local. There was a mix of national within Africa, and then there was Africa who'd also expanded out into other countries as well. And then, of course, outside countries coming into Africa. That was right across. So I looked at the smallest company was between 0 to 10 people, and the biggest was over 200 plus. I really did cover it all. And one going away point is that sustainable businesses, successful businesses, what they do in common is they really do stakeholder involvement. They have what's known as a strategy, which I call human resource excellence strategy. They have a resource preservation strategy, and that is what makes up Bearable Earth. What makes up Viable Earth is your organizational culture. And that organizational culture is the one strategy that will affect your economic performance returns. Organizational culture has a direct effect on that. And organizational culture has a direct effect on your social responsibility management business performance as well. And where the economic performance and the social responsibility management performance intersect, that is what is called Viable Earth. And where your quality management business performance and your social responsibility business performance connect, that is your Bearable Earth. And where quality management and economic business performance interconnect, that is your Equitable. And the strategy that sits in there is your globalization strategy. And that globalization strategy is about standardization. It's making sure that the United Nations labor laws are listened to. In a country like South Africa, which has a very clearly defined Basic Conditions of Employment Act, we are fairly compliant when it comes to laws like that. But in certain other parts of Africa, the companies that are equitable are the ones that are practicing all these performance outcomes, and they can all be measured, and these strategies have very specific task actions that it's like a recipe, it's like a template.
So it's one thing to transform business and to get business to operate, properly and kind of in a more sustainable manner. Government also needs it.
Yes.
And I think quite often community initiatives might also need it. I mean, government is probably the biggest
employer,
no, but also the biggest provider of business to business. Well, just about everywhere.
Of course, everywhere, every aspect.
And so how do you get government and community initiatives and other people to sing from the same hymn sheet
Yes.
in this case?
Well, when you're talking about government and we're talking about performance outcomes, I mean, every single government department still has performance outcomes that it has to deliver to. And so you would look at those 8 strategies and you would see how you were implementing it. For instance, if you look at the human resource excellence strategy, one of the most important aspects is your staff orientation. So once you've gone through the correct recruitment and selection process, the people that you're bringing in need to be properly orientated. And in that orientation, that is where your ethics and your values come up, where you are saying, this is how, if it's a government department, this is how the government department operates. These are the ethics that are play here, where it is the department outcomes are far more important than your personal outcomes. And sharing that information. So once you take each one of those strategies and you unpack those actions into a site-specific department or community initiative, and that whole process of stakeholder engagement and getting input from people right at the start of setting your strategies, not halfway through or when a crisis is hit. No, you've got to start processes right at the beginning. And the business to business, that part of that supply chain. And that's where you would come in with your community support strategies and making sure that your marginalized communities have access to the same training and orientation process, whether you're going to be part of the supply chain provider or whether you are at another end of the scale of what it is that you're doing. You do still have to be taken through that opportunity of continuous learning, knowing what your outcome, what your measurement, what are your measurement areas?
So, you've worked with some of the biggest JSE listed companies.
Yes,
You've also worked with government departments, with NGOs, and
the lot. You name it, I've
yeah.
done it.
In your opinion, what's been the difference between working with the private sector and working with government?
Well, I'll tell you what, if I go back to my early consulting days, working with the current South African government, so that's Democratic South Africa, has been enormously exhilarating in the fact that you were able to apply new learning and there was the right environment in which to do it. Whereas so let's just choose a year, for instance, 1996. So it's a few years into our democracy, but everything is still new. We're still the government of national unity, like what we've got now, but that was way back then. And then there were the huge giants on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange that were only starting to go the unbundling process, meeting regulations, whether they were overseas stock exchanges or local stock exchanges, where you came across your top executives as very old style thinking. I mean, in the early 90s, I even had Eskom board as one of my clients. And we were working on communication and collaboration at that top level, team building, for want of another word. And whereas the unrolling of the reconstruction and development programs in GEAR and NEPAD and being part of the NEDLAC Workplace Challenge, where the National Productivity Institute was, because now we had access to global markets, where you then tendered as a consulting company to look at redoing operational processes so that you could, like in the stainless steel industry, so that you could start competitively putting your products out there in the rest of the world.
I know you've done a lot of things, and we could probably, if you think back over the years, maybe the top 2 or 3 projects that you've worked on that gave you the greatest satisfaction. And I know it's going to be
Sure.
difficult because
Yeah.
you've probably got hundreds.
I'm going to start with the latest and then maybe work backwards. So in 2023, I decided I needed to volunteer in the rest of Africa. And I got on a plane and went off to Kenya while I was tying up my
So that's
my
the work with the
doctorate.
Ndalo
Yes.
Heritage.
So while I was tying up my doctorate in 2019, in the postgrad village at Nelson Mandela University, I met a master's graduate, Eric Madigo, and we were talking. His master's at that stage was medicinal nutrition, and we were philosophizing what it is that we're actually going to do with our learning. It's all very well going back into the corporate sector, but in which way was the communities, the people of the communities, the people in the countries, in which way could they truly benefit from the work that he was doing and the work that I was doing? And and Eric is just a visionary, one of Africa's visionaries, and Africa does produce them. And he went on to actually do his doctorate, which he's busy tying up now. But he started a not-for-profit organization called the Ndala Heritage Trust, and it looked at the first 1,000 days and what are the components that actually go into the first 1,000 days of life? Well, on the one hand, you've got UKM, which looks at nutrition. And on the other hand, you've got MKM, which looks at development. So on the nutrition side, and with my farming interest and farming background, that has really taken off. So we started a Go, Grow, and Glow campaign when I was there in 2023 that involved primary school children in their own vegetable gardens in the schools. And the Go, Grow, and Glow are the 3 types of food groups that you need. Go would be your carbohydrates. Your glow would be your proteins, your beans, your legumes, and that would be the grow, and the glow would be your fruits, anything with your vitamins in it. And so not only did they do vegetable gardens in Kenya, we also did songs about go, grow, and glow, and artwork, murals, graffiti, posters, poems as well. And it was such a success that the education department have decided to do this on a annual basis. And Ndalo work with Messina University. They have a UNESCO club. And so the volunteers in the UNESCO club have also been very involved in the Go, Grow, Glow campaign. And then there was the setting up the socio-economic hub that I'd done years before in KwaZulu-Natal. We've now working in Sia County, where we will be bringing in sugar beet, organic sugar beet, moving subsistence farmers into what I call smart farmers, using the latest technologies, but keeping everything organic. And then it will also have the mobile processing units. So you start coming in, working with everybody that is there, but you become part of a supply chain, part of the value add, which is the organic, and then you start seeing that whole socioeconomic development within a county, which is the equivalent of our province, taking place. And so when we talk about public-private partnerships, so you've got the university involved, you've got the communities involved, you've got your various government departments involved, and you start to see the change, and that's where Indalo's busy working at the moment. So from that perspective, that is an incredibly exciting project. I think one of the other very interesting projects at the time was the Sectional Educational Training Authority project, where all your industrial clusters were then looked at. So when we're looking at upskilling in the workplace, because our new democracy had brought in skills development levy, we were talking about continuous learning improvement in the workplace. And therefore, one needed to divide up into industrial sectional educational training authorities. And my particular role was looking at all the municipalities in the Western Cape, and doing organizational audits on that. And then finding out the skills that were in short supply, the skills that were in surplus, and then writing copious reports. It's always been about copious reports. The good news or the sad news is when you get director generals that really run with what it is that needs to be done. And the really sad times are when you've got director generals too big a risk for in many ways. It's, and ultimately you look back and think, gosh, if only they had adopted my reports, because what I warned about happened.
So, what is the thing that excites you most about our country and our continent today?
Definitely our youth. We have got youth now are keen to get to grips, getting involved in challenges. And you can see the growth of that in something called JCI, Junior Chamber International. They look at youth leadership and development. And while I was in Kenya, I introduced Kenyan youth to this concept, and how the South African JCI group then reached out to Kenya, and to actually watch this interaction and the growth of leadership development. And the four pillars of Junior Chamber International is the individual, the community, business, and then international. And because our youth do know the solutions and the way forward. And so usually when I say this, a lot of people come back to me and say, but what about all the graduates who are unemployed, or even the school leavers who are unemployed? And so my vision, if you had to say, if you had a vision and somebody gave you what it needed to do, what would you do about the unemployed youth in South Africa? And I would say I would start talking to them, listening to what they're saying, to see whether a Peace Corps could be formed. And it would be a 2-year Peace Corps. And in that 2-year Peace Corps would be the learning of many practical skills, like how to build a house, how to plumb it, how to put in the electrics, how to sort out infrastructure problems in outlying rural communities, because the way forward, we need to stop the flow to the cities. And the only way we can stop the flow to the cities is if we have this hugely invigorating, youthful Peace Corps going back out into the communities and developing those communities. Wouldn't it be fantastic to have a young Butterworth or a young Pofadder instead of only old people?
So you do a lot of consulting, but also mentoring.
Yes, I do.
So what are the major lessons that you share with your clients to guide them towards success?
Well, business is simple for a start. It's not complicated. And the most important thing a couple of skills that you need before you go into business, basic skills like a spreadsheet, knowing how to do a budget, knowing your target market. The most important thing is knowing your target market. It is finding out what the market wants. What does the market demand? It's not so much about what is it that makes me happy and wags my tail. If I can't sell my service or product that is making my tail wag, why am I doing it? So far better to know who your customer is, your profile of your customer. You should know your customer as well as you know yourself, because you want to build that relationship. And then the rest is easy.
So you describe yourself in your CV as a retired director of companies and board member of non-governmental organizations.
That's right.
But you still appear to be very busy.
I am.
And what else would you like to achieve before you kind of finally decide to slow down?
I think I'd like to see the Indala Heritage Trust socio-economic development at its steady pace. I would love that. And I would also like to be able to be involved in doing something with the unemployed youth of South Africa and having a grand vision like a Youth for Peace Corps. That would be great. And then I am still involved in one company, which is a green product called Polywave Power Technology, which is a 21st century electric motor. And currently, I'm experiencing all the barriers of market entry that I've spent my life advising and solving for other companies, and now need to do it for this particular company.
So if you have spare time, how do you spend it?
Hiking. Oh, I love hiking. I love climbing mountains. I love walking. And I love being part of community projects, mentoring. I love music. I like the arts. I just love life.
Thank you. And I think that's a very good way to end this conversation. Thank you, Dr. Barbara van Heerden, for enriching our conversation today with your wisdom, your experience. I think it's been a wonderful conversation. I'd like to thank Mobiland for their technical support, the technical staff behind the scenes who always make me look good. I'd like to thank our listeners or the people who joined us online. Please follow us on all social media platforms, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and please let us know if there's anybody you would like us to invite onto the show, and we will make sure that we, reach out to them. And if you have ways that you want to suggest that we could potentially improve the show, please let us know also. My name is Ryland Fisher, and it's been an absolute pleasure hosting Crossing the Line. Until next time, goodbye.